Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast live on the Chronicle NUFC Facebook page, YouTube, and Twitter, and later on the Everything is Black and White podcast channel. Newcastle United are into the semi-finals of the League Cup, the first semi-final of a major competition since 2004-5, the first League Cup semi-final since they last made it into the final of the League Cup and end up getting beat off Manchester City, wasn't it, back in the mid-70s? This is a momentous occasion. There is excitement running through the city, running through the fan base. You can probably hear it in my voice. I'm over the moon. I'm joined by Aaron Stokes, who I know is equally excited at the prospect of Newcastle reaching a major final. Of course, we've got to see Newcastle get in the draw, but hey, we're buzzing, aren't we?
Absolutely. I mean, what a fantastic night for the fans, for the club, for Big Dan Burn. I mean, cup fever has well and truly gripped Newcastle. So, yeah, absolutely fantastic.
Dan Burn is quite rightly grabbing the headlines. The goal I've watched so many times since it originally went in, and I could watch it 1,000 more times. What a goal it was. Not only does he cut inside and then curl it in at the bottom corner, he gets it through the defender's legs as well. I mean, look, I don't think anyone expected Dan Burn to maybe be as good as he has been. Certainly not at left back, but he's proven the doubters wrong. And he's just living out the dream of every young lad who supports Newcastle United. Let's make no bones about it. Me and you sit here as journalists, and we're very privileged to cover the club, Aaron. But, I know I wanted to be a Newcastle United player when I was younger. I'm sure you did. I'm sure many people watching this did as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't take anything away from Dan Burn, and what a fantastic moment it must have been, not only to get his first goal, but to do it at the Gallagher in such a game. And I mean, proper striker's finish as well. Not only was he the most unlikely scorer on the pitch, for him to do it with his right foot as well, just absolutely topped it off. So yeah, fantastic. And obviously we've all seen the dance moves after on social media. And I mean, who can blame him? I think if I was on Sky Sports after a game like that, I think I would have probably busted some out as well.
Have you seen the comments of this live broadcast? We've got quite a few requests to do the Dan Burn shuffle. Now, Aaron has got a get out of jail free card here because, unfortunately, while trying to be the professional footballer he longed to be, he injured his knee playing Monday Night Football with myself and a few others. He's been under the knife recently, haven't you, Aaron, to try and solve that issue? All gone well?
Yeah, all's gone well, and I'm on the mend hopefully in a couple of weeks. But yeah, I'm currently on crutches, so I don't think there'll be any Dan Burn dances for me. I might get a telling off from the missus when she walks in the living room.
Yeah, so you've got the sick note there. I might, depending on how we feel at the end of this episode, I might do it. If it's good enough for Keith Downey on Sky Sport, it's good enough for me here on the Everything is Black and White podcast. So we'll see how I feel at the end of the episode. I mean, the videos going around social media are quite something. So I'm doing it last night, and I think everyone for a moment was a little bit gobsmacked looking at the screen, and then just applaud it. But it gives you an insight into what I've already said many times in this podcast, what I consider to be, but it's not so much of a hidden asset anymore. I mean, it's out there in the open. It's just that unity within the dressing room to feel comfortable enough to do that. They're on a high, and what I loved, just in the moments building up to Dan Burn doing the shuffle, was Eddie Howe, and he's had that speech, didn't he? And he said, taking the final whistle, and then he said, but also taking Dan Burn scoring in front of the Gallagher. And that is what dreams are made of. You're a young lad growing up on Tyneside, supporting Newcastle. You dream about doing what Alan Shearer did every single week. And I think he probably had a season ticket, didn't he? Watching Shearer do just that. So for him to do that, and for Eddie Howe to pick up on it as well, I think there's just something special about that. Like, Eddie Howe knows that's more than a goal for Dan Burn.
Eddie Howe knew, didn't he? And there was a great interview with the pair of them on Sky after where Howe sort of acknowledged really that he knew how much it meant to Dan Burn. And I think, you watch the celebrations when Burn scored, Miggy, Wilson, Cher, all running over him, jumping on him. Willock, there's a great video of Willock bounding over and screaming, just sort of letting out this roar. They all knew how much it meant, not just in terms of the game, the club, the stage of the competition they were at. They knew how much it meant for Dan Burn. They were probably still in shock, as I say, that he managed to pull it off. Fantastic finish. But yeah, look, great to see the scenes after the game. I think if we needed any sort of reminder of how good the morale is inside that dressing room, that was the perfect reminder. And very good to see the Sky cameras in where I thought, Howe spoke brilliantly as ever. And, after such a doom and gloom of Saturday, and I love doing this podcast, right? It's one of the highlights of my week doing this podcast with you. But I absolutely hated it on Monday because I hate talking about them losing, and we've gotten so used to them winning. It was such a setback on Saturday. So for them to bounce back in this manner was absolutely fantastic. So look, huge chance of going to the final now. Obviously, we'll know more this evening when the draw comes out. But yeah, what a feeling and what a platform it's given them, to kick on now in the Premier League and keep this run going, with favourable fixtures in the next couple of weeks.
Just to be clear, I have not given him 20 quid to say that he loves coming on this podcast with me. Okay, we're equal in how great this show has been over the last few months. I mean, Newcastle have also played a massive part in being so good we can be overly positive. But he's right. Monday wasn't a good episode, a good feeling because we were feeling so down and the fans were feeling down. But we both said, and the way to get rid of that feeling is a victory. And Newcastle came, steaming out, didn't they, against Leicester City, who we thought would be a little bit better than they were on Boxing Day. But if anything, they were worse. And I know they've been hit by injury, but they were just nowhere near a competitor for Newcastle United. That being said, you felt as the game wore on, you would be forgiven for thinking it's not going to be Newcastle United's night because Sean Longstaff could have had a hat-trick before half-time. Danny Ward pulled off a few good saves. There was a few sitters in there. We'll talk more in detail about those chances as the episode goes on. And I think Newcastle United of old, the heads would have started to go down, and they would have thought on the pitch, it's just not going to be our night. But there was a few moments before Dan Burn got the opener, and it was very nearly an own goal. It was a clearance, and it looped over and went out for a corner. And it was as if someone just turned up, especially the Gallagher, or just up a dial. I mean, the whole night was fantastic from start to finish by the fans. But in that moment, the noise just went up. And I think it was Trippier ran over to the corner and he raised his arms in the end. It went up further. And then the goal came a few minutes later. And for me, that stuck in my head because it was really important that the fans helped the players believe that the war of attrition was going to pull through and Newcastle were going to get the goal or goals to get them through to the semi-final.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fans had such a big role to play before the game, which obviously they did fantastically well. That the atmosphere, it was a cracking initiative from all flags. But as you say, as the game went on in the first 45 minutes and Newcastle had wasted a boatload of chances, Leicester were growing into the game. Huge emphasis on the fans to make sure that they didn't get on the players' backs, which they didn't, and that they kept, the atmosphere up, which they did. And I think it would have been so easy, as you say, if Newcastle of old, especially after Saturday's result, when there's already sort of that doubt in fans' mind, to have, turned on the players or sort of made their feelings known. But fair play to both the players and the fans, because I thought, for the entire game, they really got the players through. And I think once that first goal went in, there was no turning back for Newcastle. But those early stages, yes, Newcastle United were on top, but what we've been saying on this podcast the last couple of days about them not being clinical enough and how I wanted them to, really start finding their feet again in front of goal. It just didn't happen for them in the first 45 minutes. And that doubt, did start to creep in before Burns' goal.
It didn't happen, but I think as probably one of the few people who have been overly critical of Sean Longstaff, and I'm well aware I have been, I'm going to praise him for getting into the positions because I think that's been one of the things that's been lacking from his game is getting in the positions where he's a goal threat. And for him to be going in at half time, rightly thinking he should have had a hat-trick, I'm going to go, well, do you know what? Fair play. At least you were in those positions to miss those chances. The first one, I mean, that is an unforgivable miss.
You can't really excuse that one.
Do you know what I mean? But the other two, there's a decent save and what have you. But in the end, it doesn't matter because Newcastle won. But what we want to see from Sean Longstaff going forward in the next few games and the rest of the season is him getting in them positions and then making it count. But he was in those positions and fair play to the lad. That's where I want to see him.
Yeah, 100%. You do make a good point, and I think we're so used to Willock playing that 10 role, but Longstaff in not just yesterday, but in the last couple of months, has really improved his attacking side of his game. He's got a fantastic relationship now with Miggy down that right hand side, and he can fill in that Bruno role when Bruno's not playing. So, we all know what Sean Longstaff's about, and he does the dirty stuff. He never shies away from anything. Um, and maybe finishing's not his forte. I thought one of the chances yesterday in the first half, it was a fantastic save from Ward. You can't really excuse the first one where maybe it came too early in the game for him and he just hadn't found his feet. But I thought overall it was a good performance from him, and it was good to see that he sort of put those early misses behind him and didn't let it affect his overall game.
Yeah, I mean, let's just run through the first half because notes here. 40 seconds in, Sean Longstaff fires wide. I've got sitter and big letters written down here. Sorry, Sean, but Bruno then fires wide. Callum Wilson has a shot deflected wide. Byrne has a header. Guimaraes fires wide again. And then Ward saves some Longstaff. And then straight after the interval, Ward pushes Joe Linton's effort onto the post. I mean, you read that, and I think it's totally understandable to if people had suddenly gone, this isn't going to be our night tonight. I mean, because that is a boatload of chances.
Yeah, definitely. And there was that feeling, especially towards the end of the first half, when Leicester actually started, getting their feet and really actually putting Newcastle under some pressure. I mean, why on earth Patson Daka didn't shoot when he had that chance, towards the back end of the first half, I'll never know. And I don't think, Brendan Rodgers was too pleased with it after. But we've seen this earlier in the season when Newcastle, we saw it at Bournemouth at home, we've seen it against Palace, where it's just not one of their days and they can't find the net. But praise to them for sticking to it. And I thought in that second half they were much more clinical. I mean, Joe Linton of old would have never scored that chance. He would have never got that chance on target. Never mind, with his right foot. Never mind his left. So credit the players. I thought they did well in attack, and I think really, really positive to see that even though it wasn't going their way early doors, they still managed to come through it.
With all due respect to Chris Wood, I hope he was watching Joe Linton, because that's how you finish that sort of chance. It was nearly exactly the same chance that Chris Wood actually put over against Sheffield Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, I hope he was watching Dan Burn more so, to be fair. I mean, the reflexes and the attack and nous that Dan Burn showed to get in that position, Chris Wood could only dream of that at the minute. So
Joe Linton with the assist there, wasn't it? And yeah, it was because you were watching him. He'd done that run, Dan Burn, a few times, and he just finds that burst of speed. Like, from a Leicester point of view, you'll be disappointed that Dan Burns managed to burst past you. And to be fair, the defending from Leicester was absolutely shocking. And it was no surprise that Newcastle ended up scoring and having all these chances. 22 shots on goal, 9 on target. Leicester were there to be beaten. But sometimes, Aaron, you can have all the shots in the world, none go in. Leicester run up the other end and grab a goal. And that was the fear before Newcastle grabbed 2, because, of course, later in the game, Jamie Vardy comes on and, he has 2 good chances where you would have expected him to score.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, that back end of the first half was a little bit nervy for 5-10 minutes when you thought, Leicester were actually going to make Newcastle pay against the run of play for not taking some of those early chances that you mentioned. But, credit to both the attack and the defence. I thought second half, especially the defence, really tightened up. I mean, that Vardy miss, the more you watch it, is an absolute sitter from him. I think that's worse than Sean Longstaff's. But look, Newcastle rode their luck a little bit, but they came out of it, and that's the main thing. And they were good value for the win. I don't think you can say that they didn't deserve it. I think they deserved a comfortable win. But as I say, we've seen it, especially at St James's, a couple of times this season when Newcastle have just, they've looked really good in attacking phases in the build-up, but that sort of finishing's let them down. And I mean, I'm sure we'll go on to talk about Callum Wilson, but again, looking a little bit out of sorts last night, looking like he hasn't fully shaken off that injury, or sorry, that illness. So he really needed, other players around him to step up, which they did. I just think nobody thought the player to step up was going to be the 6'7" left back, but take what you can get.
Honestly, once we finish this podcast, I'm probably going to go and watch the goal another dozen times, because it was just such a brilliant goal. Geordie Tune for Life says, fully deserved win. I made Leicester look very poor. I will get on to Tom's question in a moment about who do we fancy in the semi-finals. Of course, another couple of games tonight, and then the draw as well. Got John Steele saying the atmosphere last night was the best I've known it, up there with the game against Barcelona, Champions League, and Arsenal last season. It was a fantastic atmosphere. I mean, as we've mentioned there, the flags and the scarves just brilliant. And I, we use the 12th man cliche quite often, and people outside Newcastle might say, well, every club's have got their fans and they're passionate. But honestly, last night, I just felt they just pushed them in the right direction. They helped Newcastle get over the line into the semi-finals.
Can I just ask a question? Because obviously, as we've touched on earlier in the podcast, I was, bedbound and with my ice pack on and my crutches and having severe, FOMO of what I was going to miss. So obviously I didn't get to experience the atmosphere. It obviously seemed fantastic watching it on TV and listening. But where does that rank for you in the last 12 months? Is that better than the Arsenal night, which is obviously the go-to when everyone thinks of fantastic atmospheres in 2022?
I think over a consistent time, over
Yeah,
the
all
whole
game.
match, that is probably the best it's been for a long, long time. Because, and I'm repeating myself here, but I genuinely think without the level of backing they had last night off the fans, given the
Yeah,
result against Sheffield Wednesday,
yeah,
and given that they just seemed not able to beat Danny Ward, there's a good chance the heads would have dropped. But the fans collectively got together. I mean, cheering every tackle, every throw, and every corner. The fans played such a massive role in that. And the scenes prior with the scarves going, absolutely brilliant. They wanted to replicate what it was like for Alan Shearer's testimonial. Well, they did that. Plus, you throw in the flags, and yeah, fair play to every single fan that was there last night. And that's not to say those watching at home didn't play their part as well, because every fan counts. But those inside the ground certainly played their part last night. And the players will be very, very appreciative of all the efforts from the fans inside and outside of the ground.
yeah, definitely. I mean, as I say, gutted to have missed that one, and I'm glad that you've sort of noted that I played my part from watching that behind the TV screen. So thank you for
that. um, we talk about Dan Burns' goal, fantastic goal. Joe Linton's goal. Now he had another fantastic game, in my view, yesterday. I mean, it's hard to say who didn't have a fantastic game. The pass from Miggy was absolutely superb. I mean, a brilliant counter-attacking goal. Leicester give the ball away. The Newcastle fly forward. Perfect way to pass by Miguel Almiron, and Joe Linton calmly into the corner. And the celebrations in the corner there where the Gallagher meets the stand. A letter again, some fantastic photographs. Not least my mother and father looking absolutely wild because they were two rows from the front. So they certainly enjoyed the celebrations there. But what did you make of the goal? I thought it kind of sums up the way Newcastle United play. You give the ball away, they're going to punish you, not least because you've given the ball away, but also because they're still so fit with 75 minutes on the clock that they can run twice around the city centre of Newcastle and still be up for another length at St James's Park.
Yeah, I mean, as you said earlier, the Leicester defending was shocking, but taking off and away from Newcastle's playing that goal, perfectly weighted pass from Miggy, who 12 months ago probably would have absolutely shanked that out. But as I said earlier, Joelinton we've talked a lot about his transformation, his confidence, but the last couple of games, I think he's really sort of finding another level completely. I think he was probably the one saving grace of that Chef Wed defeat. I thought he was probably the best player on the pitch at Hillsborough Saturday, and again last night, whether it's going forward in attack and in those phases or helping out Burn in the defence, he's just absolutely fantastic. The partnership that him and Willock have established on that left-hand side is absolutely fantastic. And it's why I said on Monday or Tuesday when we filmed the post-match Leicester game that I wouldn't be making any changes to his position. And I know, further down the line there'll be questions as to whether Longstaff drops out and Joelinton drops deeper. But for now, I think he keeps maxing out the team because he's playing so well in that left-hand side. And I think, look, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but that goal last night was, what you expected from him when he paid 40 million and he came as a striker. If he can start actually, adding the goals and assists that we've really wanted from him for 12 months or 18 months, then we're absolutely laughing. So he's absolutely fantastic. I love him a bit. We've obviously waxed lyrical about on this podcast a lot and how fantastic he is. He's the absolute heartbeat of this team. And I know he won Player of the Season last year. And I think if he keeps this up, he'll slowly go under the radar for winning it again this year. He's been absolutely phenomenal.
Now, listeners to this podcast know I'm very proudly the chairman, founder of the Miguel Almiron fan club. But I was just wondering, Aaron, you look across not just the starting 11, but across the squad, and you could have a case for several different fan clubs, and I'm sure there are people out there who would gladly be the chairman of the Joe Linton fan club or the Dan Burn fan club, the Cal Muscle fan club. And I can't pinpoint a time when there's been such a Newcastle United squad where nearly every player has got sections of the fan base who say, "Oh, he's my favorite," but then collectively they're all pulling in the same direction as well. There's no stars, so to speak. I mean that's I think really beneficial for Newcastle United because the star is the club.
There's been so many good teams over the years, but you feel like there's never been a squad like this where a good 95% of them are close to hero status. I mean, Joel and I mean, I can't believe that we're over 20 minutes into this podcast and we haven't talked about Willock, who for me was man of the match for me last night. I thought one of his best games he's had in a Newcastle shirt. I thought defensively and going forward, he was brilliant, and I would happily start the fan club for him. I think we're finally seeing that £25 million player that they signed a couple of seasons ago. But as you say, you can name half the team. I mean, Byrne is rightly getting so much recognition. Botman is fantastic, as we know. Miggy, as everybody's cottoned onto your chain of thinking about Miggy. And Isak's coming back. We've got a £63 million player coming back. Could, turn out to be an absolute diamond. And everything now is just going so well. So the entire squad deserves credit. Eddie Howe made sure in the summer he didn't want to disrupt the dressing room by bringing in superstars or players with huge wages. And as you say, there isn't sort of a hierarchy. Everybody's together, whether it's Bruno or Miggy or what wages you're on or anything. There's such a togetherness, and it's fantastic to see. And it'll be crucial towards the back end of the season when if they suffer a blip or as the pressure gets turned on when they're trying to go to top four. So yeah, long may it last.
Dale McVeigh says he thought or she thought after a few shaky weeks that Willock played really well. He ran at the Leicester defence, had every opportunity and really dragged the team up the pitch. And there's a few comments from those watching live on the same train of thought. Les Stapleton here saying how was a brilliant example of everything. And yeah, the scenes at full time, he doesn't really allow himself to show too much emotion, does he, Eddie Howe? But I thought last night was another example of him just allowing himself to show that, he does have feelings and he does sometimes let himself get carried away and maybe he's got maybe he has had a little thought about walking down Wembley Way, and I'm sure it only lasted a couple of seconds because we know what Eddie Howe's like, and it'll all be about Fulham on Sunday. But we saw a little bit of a different side to Eddie Howe last night. That big talk in the dressing room and just the emotion on the touchline.
I mean, I've just pulled up a quote from him here just on that topic and talk about not letting yourself get carried away. This is what he was asked in the post-match press conference about the cup run. And he goes, "I'm focusing on Fulham solely, immediately. I'm thinking about our next game. The semi-final can wait. We'll obviously look at who we can get, but I think that has to take a back seat." And that just sums him up. I mean, that is just Eddie Howe to a T. And I think it was a brilliant moment yesterday when he was on the touchline, and the second goal had just went in from Joel, and there was sort of this collective sigh of relief, and Howe let out this huge fist pump, turn to the Milburn stand, give the sort of fist pump to the fans before sort of calming himself down. And he has these little glimpses, doesn't he, where he shows this passion and then it's straight back to just being cool as a cucumber. So I'm sure he's probably allowed himself 30 seconds at most of dreaming about a potential final at Wembley next month. But, as he said, it'll all be about Fulham on Sunday. And that's probably how it should be.
What I loved are the moments that you kind of, especially as you're sitting up high as I was yesterday, you get maybe a bit of better vantage point than if you were right down at the front of the Gallagher or what have you. But after the first goal went in, Callum Wilson took an eternity to get back to the halfway line, where as Leicester were willing to try to kick off, and he turns around and he just points to his temple and just let's just focus, because you are most vulnerable when you've conceded a goal. And we've seen at least once, I think, this season when Newcastle have conceded straight after. I mean, given Newcastle's brilliant defence. It must have been quite a while ago, but I do seem to remember that happening. I think it's 630 minutes Nick Pope hasn't conceded a goal in, which is fantastic. But it's just those little bits of game management, not only from the touchline, but from the players, from the likes of Trippier and Wilson and Bruno, who at one point last night just kicked the ball into touch. Safety first, let's get it out. Of course, you don't always want to do that, but that was what was right for that moment. And it's those little bit of game management which will have come from the touchline, which elevates Newcastle to another level. This is what the top teams have got.
Yeah, 100%. And we saw it last night, but we've seen it many times in the last couple of weeks. We saw it hugely at Chelsea when they were sort of put under pressure the last 15 minutes with that 1-0 lead. We saw it with Arsenal where, there was so much sort of fury afterwards from Arteta and the supporters as to, Newcastle's supposed time wasting. But Eddie Howe wants them to have this ruthless streak. He wants them to get nasty. If they're going to be mixing it with the big boys, they need to. And I thought, game management after that Vardy chance last night, which was a bit of a wake-up call, they saw the game out really well. They didn't let sort of the occasion get on top of them. And I think it's what we'll see, more of under Howe, especially as this team sort of grows in stature and grows up the table. I think you will see them, actually getting really, really smart with how they see out games, which is, what they've really, really lacked in recent years. We never saw it under Bruce at all. Benitez maybe in a sense could manage games a bit better, but I think Howe's got it absolutely spot on, and the team are really, really good at grabbing the lead and actually holding on to it.
It was interesting when St. Maximin was getting ready to come on and how arm around the shoulder, he was in his ear, he was pointing and he really giving him instructions. A lot of talk about St. Maximin and his future and how he fits into this Newcastle United side. Leicester, for me, looked done in, 70 minutes on the clock. They just looked absolutely knackered. And the space was there. I mean, the space was there all game for Newcastle, but the space was really there, I felt, for St. Maximin to get the ball and run at the defenders. But he didn't actually get that much time when you look at the time of the subs. Anything to read into that, do you think, Aaron, or was that just, Newcastle, the players that won the pitch were doing so well that why if they're fit enough to play to 75, 80 minutes, then why do you need to change it?
I think Maxi's got his strengths, and Maxi's strengths probably don't lie in a game where you try to defend a narrow lead towards the end. And I think that's the one negative for Maxi with coming off the bench in these games when Newcastle are winning or trying to stay out a lead. He came on the 87th minute against Arsenal. He came on very late last night because there wasn't really a need for him to come on. He'll probably be frustrated personally that's the way it is, but I just think he doesn't offer enough defensively to warrant bringing him on when he's trying to stay out a game. And I think that's why we've seen so many times this season Jacob Murphy gets off the bench before him. Now, I don't think there's much to read into it. I think that's just the way Maxi plays, and I think he'll probably admit that. I think what is good to see that lots of rumours about one, his future, two, bust ups with Howe or whatever it was, before the game last week. Good to see that he seems focused. He's overcome whatever ailment kept him out of Saturday's game, which was big setback for him because before that game against Sheff Wed, everyone thought he was an absolute shoo-in to start. Right, this is his chance to get back in the team. He's missed a big opportunity there because, as I said earlier, I wouldn't be rushing him back into this team given how well Joe Linton's coped in that left midfield position. So it's going to be tricky for Maxi. He's got to work very, very hard to get back in this team. And I think it'll really, really show how much desire he's got to play for Newcastle the next couple of months to see how he comes through this period and tries to fight his way back.
Tom Dixon says Pope is a great buy. That's why he's a number one goalkeeper. Our friends at Newcastle Fans TV say Nick Pope is now has the all-time club record for the consecutive clean sheets with 7. And we talk about how good, the likes of Joe Willock, Joe Linton did, the whole team really. And Geordie Tune for Life says he found it difficult to find a man of the match because he thinks all the lads played very well. And I think that's a fair point. Here are the player ratings from our chief sports writer, Lee Ryder. You have Pope on 8, Trippier on 8, Share on 8, Botman on 8, Byrne on 9, Gimresh on 9, Longstaff on 8, Willock on 8, Almiron on 9, Joe Linton 10, which I mean, again, I totally agree with that. Actually, I thought he had another man of the match performance. And what do you make of those player ratings?
Yeah, I don't think you can really argue with that. I don't think anybody really deserved less than an 8. I think, as you say, Joel in goal and an assist, fantastic both in attack and defence. I think the only real issue I've got with that is that Joe Willock isn't higher than an 8. I thought, as I said earlier, he was absolutely spot on last night in everything that he did. But look, you were hard pressed last night to find a clear man of the match. I know Bruno ended up winning it, but you could have made arguments for Burn, Joel and Willock, even Miggy to a degree after his first half. So fantastic, perfect response, perfect collective response after Sheffield Wednesday. And now it's just making sure that keep the score for Fulham on Sunday.
And it was Wilson with an 8 there. Craig says Joelinton last night, phenomenal. The midfield enforcer. And I tweeted this out this morning, actually, on reflection of the 2 goal scorers last night, Aaron. I don't think I could have wished for a better 2 to grab the goals, because Joelinton has been the example of the Eddie Howe effect. Dan Burns not too far behind in terms of he's performed so much better than anyone else thought he would do. I mean, he'd had brilliant years at Brighton, but as I said earlier in the show, I don't think anyone expected him to be the number 1 left back, and deservedly so. And then he's living out his dream, scoring in front of the Gallagher, as I mentioned before. I mean, I would have taken it any goal. Nick Pope, wayward clearance, getting caught in the wind and ending up in the back of the net, or Callum Wilson knocking in one with his backside. But as it goes, the romantic Newcastle United fan in me is really over the moon that it was Joelinton and Dan Burn that got the goals.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I mean, one goal made in Blythe, one goal made in Brazil. It's quite poetic, really, when you think about it. So yeah, look, everything about last night it just had that feel, didn't it, of a really memorable night. And I think from the pre-match scenes, from the way the game panned out, for Dan Burns' goal, the performances, and then obviously the post-match scenes on Sky, I think it goes down as one of those games where fans will remember that for a long, long time, even if they end up getting knocked out in the semi-final. That game, as Arsenal is so often, looked back on, it'll be really, really thought of as a memorable night, and just absolutely fantastic that it happened to Burn and Joelinton to be the stars of the show.
Darren Bailey says Max will be used when we eventually go a goal down. Eventually go a goal down. Love it. I need a creative spark, or if we need to beat the low block. And Newcastle Fans TV say Maxi whipped in 4 crosses, which is unlike him, and that'll be the instruction from Eddie Howe. Good to see him taking on the instruction. Of course, it is Fulham on Sunday, as you mentioned, and I'll have the preview podcast tomorrow with John Gibson and the view from the opposition later in the week. Geordie Tune for Life says Newcastle will have to watch out on Sunday because Fulham have a very exciting wing back in Antonio Robinson, who will get up there into the attacks. He, the former Wigan player, I'm sure a lot of you are well aware of him. Tom Dixon says Botman has been outstanding since he's been at this club, and I don't think anyone can argue with that at all. The defence yesterday, Aaron, were solid again. I mean, that partnership between Fabian Schär and Sven Botman is probably another one of those unexpected pluses from this season.
Yeah, massively, and it was quite a surprise to see that Botman actually had quite a quiet game by his standards. He's been on such a fantastic run of form the last 5-6 games where he's really made everybody stand up and take note of what he's about. I thought last night he sort of faded in the background, clearly miffed that he'd lost that unbeaten run against Sheffield Wednesday on Saturday. But that partnership is fantastic. We've spoken a lot about it on the pod, and Fabian Schär's revival from being on the scrap heap under Bruce to arguably being in the conversation now for being one of the best pound for pound signings Newcastle have made in a long time. I mean, to get him for only 3 million and hopefully get a couple more years out of him, I think it just shows a fantastic journey he's been on. And look, this defensive run just keeps going on. Nick Pope looks absolutely unbeatable. And I know somebody in the comments earlier in the show asked about Dubravka, who obviously will be staying at the club now beyond the end of the month. I think he'd be very, very hard pressed for opportunities, given how well Nick Pope's been playing.
Yeah, I mean, Nick Pope's the number one, isn't he? And I mean, to be fair to Dubravka, I know Newcastle conceded two against Chef Wed and went out, but he pulled off a couple of decent saves. And if he is in the right mindset and he's prepared to sit on the bench while at the same time during the week really push Nick Pope, then he's a fantastic, backup to Nick Pope to have on the bench, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. And look, the reaction to Dubravka coming back has been mixed. A lot of fans, will probably never forgive him and the manner of his exit in the summer. But it's something that I wrote about before he even came back. That he looks like a player that needs sort of Howe's arm around the shoulder to try and get his career back on track. The word out of the club is that Loris Karius has done an absolute U-turn compared to when he joined. He obviously joined in such a cloud. He's admittedly only played one game, but he's clearly benefited from Howe's guidance, and I think it'll be the same from Dubravka. He might not play in the second half of the season, but I think after how bad it went at Man United, if any coach is going to try and get the best out of him before the summer, it's probably Eddie Howe, given the transformations that he's done with Miggy and Joe Linton and countless other players. So Dubravka's got a lot of making up to do in the eyes of some fans, and he, as I say, he probably won't get too much game time to do it, but I think it's the right decision for him to come back. And a decision that he made as well, you've got to remember, he could have stayed at Man United and it clearly wasn't the right environment for him, and he clearly knows that he's made a mistake. So good to see that, I thought he did okay against Sheffield. Yes, they conceded 2 goals, but, it was good to see him back in the Newcastle shirt, I thought.
Now, Newcastle obviously they went out of the FA Cup to Sheffield Wednesday. Lots of people weren't very happy at that. And of course, you don't want to go out of the FA Cup at such an early stage, and you certainly don't want to go out to a League One club. But considering they're in the semi-finals of the League Cup, Aaron, and I'm sure Eddie Howe would say, still very disappointing to go out of the FA Cup, but could going out of the FA Cup be a blessing in disguise, given, they're still within a shout for the title and they are in the semi-final of the League Cup?
In hindsight, yes. I think, Saturday perfectly exemplified that the squad isn't deep enough. The squad, isn't strong enough to fight on 3 fronts at the minute. So, look, in hindsight, now that they're already in the final for the Carabao, I think a massive sting's been taken out with that defeat Saturday. And I think you do look back on it and think maybe it's a blessing, because once they've got this Carabao Cup journey out the way, whether that be in the semis or in the final, they've got an absolute clear run in the Prem to focus on, make sure they finish in the top 4. So, look, if they got knocked out last night, I think we'd be saying that it was an absolute disaster that they got knocked out the FA Cup. But now that we're sat here, with the luxury of being in the final 4, I think, yeah, I said the other day you couldn't excuse the defeat, and I think Newcastle should be disappointed in the way they went out. But on the whole, looking at the bigger picture, I don't think it's the end of the world now that they're in the final 4 of the Carabao Cup.
Because if they'd gone through last night, but also had a replay against Sheffield Wednesday, their
Yeah.
schedule would have been unbelievable. I just want to have a quick word about Ayoze Perez, because I felt very sorry for him. Very sorry for him when he eventually went off. Well, actually, not that sorry for him. He took an absolute battering from absolutely everyone on that pitch. And I'm not saying he was targeted, because I don't think he was, but he just seemed to be on the end of some very fair but feisty challenges, and he was getting frustrated. He got very frustrated at Longstaff at one point. He took him out, and there was a bit of back and forth about. I think he was accusing Longstaff of maybe going down a little bit too easily and then milking it. He got a booking for that tackle, and the referee had to call him back and tell him to be quiet and explain that actually he was totting up the challenges rather than just the challenge on Longstaff, and then he got subbed off. And I guess he's an example for the grass isn't always greener. But then again, he has had good times at Leicester. But I'm sure part of him will be heading back down on that coach to the East Midlands, thinking, "Goodness me, if I just held out for a little bit longer."
Yeah, I think everybody talks about the Rafa Benitez thing of, if I just held out a little bit longer until the takeover happened. Maybe there's a similar feeling with Perez, who, look, at the time, I don't think anybody could begrudge him for leaving. He was a fantastic servant for Newcastle, who was brought in for very little money. He was relatively unknown, and he turned into a very decent Premier League player. who looked at the time like he'd outgrown the club. Now, as you say, with hindsight, and I bet if he wished he had a crystal ball, he would turn back time. But he looks like he's struggling at Leicester, and he's in and out of this team. He doesn't look completely settled under Brendan Rodgers still. So yeah, I mean, I don't feel too sorry for him though. So
Yeah, actually, a few people in the comments have told me that they don't feel sorry for him either. Who do you want in the next round then? We're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. Nottingham Forest play Wolves this evening. Southampton face Manchester City, and then Man United already in the hat with Newcastle. What is the ideal result for you tonight?
the ideal result tonight is Southampton beating Manchester City.
What is the realistic result?
The realistic result is City get through against Southampton, and then hopefully it's Manchester City against Manchester United in the semi. And then you're looking at Wolves or Forest. I think you'd probably want Forest out of the two, given that Wolves have just got Lopetegui in and are probably in a better position. But if I'm completely honest, I don't think it's in the world if they draw Manchester United tonight. We saw what they did at the Old Trafford. They matched them. Yes, okay, they were probably a bit fortunate to come away, given United missed some chances near the end. But I think as long as they avoid Manchester City, you've got to be happy. But of course, Forest or Wolves is the one you want.
Yeah, Tom says he'd like the Manchester derby, and then either Wolves, Forest versus Newcastle. I mentioned there the last time Newcastle made it into a semi-final of a major competition. It was the semi-final of the FA Cup when they were hammered 4-1 off Manchester United. I think Newcastle finished 12th that season, maybe. It was under Graham Souness. And you think now, if you compare the two clubs, everything's so different now. I think going into that game against Manchester United, you always felt Manchester United were going to win that game regardless. But it's interesting, as you see, Newcastle could draw them tonight out of the hat, and I don't think anyone would be rocking up to that first leg, whether it be Old Trafford or St James's Park, fearing a battering off Manchester United. If anything, I think Newcastle, given the form, and I know Man United are in great form as well, but I think teams, will look upon Newcastle as one of those they don't want to face because they've got something really good here at St James's Park. Unity, everyone pulling in the same direction, and talented players. I don't think it matters who Newcastle get. Yes, you want to avoid the big sides, but whoever they get, it'll all be about what Newcastle can do to beat the opposition, rather than we're there. It's City or it's Man United. I'm a little bit scared of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anybody watching that game last night will be absolutely dreading coming up to St James's Park for a cup semi-final to face Newcastle. So, look, they've even taken points off Manchester City this season. It wouldn't be ideal, but you would have faith that Howe was at least going to give it a go, and they would at least give it a good shot over the two legs. As I said, Manchester United are in fantastic form, but they're beatable. Sides already have shown it this season that you can break down the defence, and I think you would have to be extremely confident in this vein of form if Forest or Wolves get pulled out of that hat next to Newcastle. So, look, we'd all know by 10:30 tonight, but hopefully, as long as they avoid City, I think it's an all right result.
You look at last night's performance and the run they've been on. If you're a potential January arrival, are you looking at this squad and going, I really want to be part of this? Or are you looking at it and thinking, we're there. I'm a first team player at whatever club I'm currently at. If I come into this Newcastle United squad, given how well everyone's playing, I might be sitting on the bench for a few weeks. And that's not exactly what I want. But then I
Well,
guess if that is your train of thought, then you're probably not the player Newcastle
well,
United
that's
wants.
I was
So
just about to say if
I
you're
knew you were
even
going to say that.
having those doubts, then Eddie Howe isn't going to be signing you. So I think even before last night, I've said it a lot of times, War Flags have turned this club and they're a real advert for this club, and when they get going and they have the displays on, players must watch that and think I would love to be a part of that. So yeah, I mean, look, just for one example, and this isn't me saying it's going to happen, but if you're James Maddison in a struggling Leicester team that are going nowhere, it's ran its course, and you've got Trippier, Wilson, and Pope, who you know very, very well, in your ear at the World Cup, and you're watching last night at Newcastle dismantling your team, you must be thinking, I want a piece of that. And look, I'm not saying that's going to happen this window. He's probably going to prove too expensive, but I think a lot of players will be taking note, and if an offer comes in from Newcastle, they'll be a lot more receptive to it than they were 12 months ago.
Do you understand that Newcastle are any further forward in the transfer window, or do you think we'll be expecting movement, if any, in the last week or so?
I think they'll leave it late. I think, the word that we're getting from the club is that nothing's imminent, and they're taking their time. I thought it was very, very um, telling from Dan Ashworth last night when he was speaking on Sky Sports about how it isn't sustainable for them to keep buying first team players, and maybe they're going to cast their eye to the future, and we might see more signings of the Garang Kual ilk than first team players like Bruno or Botman. But there's of course a little bit of money there if they want to spend it. I don't think there'll be any marquee signings by any means, but I think Howe knows that they probably need one or two more just to plug a few gaps in midfield and maybe at the back. So, but I do think it'll be later in the window, and I think they'll also try and do a lot of business with the pre-contract deals and try and tempt players that are out of contract in the summer into signing agreements. So obviously the likes of you, Tielemans, who I know is getting mentioned a lot in the comments, that's maybe one for that type of deal. But yeah, I think it'll be late in the window in terms of any incomings.
Roger says he didn't think Tielemans did a lot apart from the shot he had, which was a lovely technique actually, and just went over the bar. But again, I look at it the way Leicester played; they never looked up for the game, and even if you're Leicester's best player on the pitch, which Tielemans was last night, in terms of talent and ability, not necessarily the way he performed, and you're also thinking about your future. I don't think it's any secret that his more than an eye is probably on the exit door. Then maybe it is a little bit hard to get yourself up for the game, especially when your team's so depleted, especially when you at a ground and you look around and you think, goodness me, this is the kind of team that maybe I do want to be joining. And I'm sure he put all his effort into it. Did he have such a bad game that you'd be put off signing Tielemans if you were in charge?
I don't think I'd ever be put off a player by one game, and I think you've hit the nail absolutely perfectly on the head there with Leicester very, very depleted, not having much of the ball, wasting the few chances that they had up against a very, very good Newcastle team who had that 12th man behind them. I think even, as you say, the best players would have struggled in that team last night. So Tielemans, he's absolutely fantastic player. He's been a fantastic servant to Leicester. It does probably feel like the time to move on. I know he's been linked with an exit, probably the last 4 or 5 windows. It would be a huge coup if Newcastle are the team that persuade him to jump ship, and we know that he is a target. So maybe one for the future.
I just want to ask you once before we finish off about Steve Bruce. Now, he's been on a podcast with Warnock, and he made some remarks about Eddie Howe, pretty much suggesting that he was the one that suggested him to the Newcastle United board. He said, I turned to them and said, well, I think my time might be up here because the only negative thing here is myself. And would you believe it? They did ask me for my opinion on who should take over from me. And I did put forward Eddie to them. I told them I thought he was a very, very good young manager. And I'm pleased to say that he got the job. And I'm delighted that they're doing so well. Intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought that he would have recommended that fella that got Bournemouth relegated, as he so kindly called Howe a few months before he got the job. So yeah, look, not sure how much truth there is in that. I think the owner's probably well, actually, it is funny enough. Maybe he did suggest Eddie Howe, and that was why they tried to get Unai Emery first, because they thought let's steer clear of Bruce's suggestions. But yeah, I did hear that podcast, but a lot of hot air, I thought.
Yeah, most certainly. Yeah, so all eyes just tonight on the draw. We'll be running a live blog on chroniclive.co.uk so you can keep up to date with it. We also have the transfer dedicated live blog as well, running daily, where we bring you all the rumours and gossip as well as the hard stories as well. I did ask for people to give me their one-word verdict on last night. Aaron kindly just wrote Blythe, which is definitely a suggestion that even with the crutches, you want to do the Dan Burn shuffle. And we had Leo Wilson writing the word destiny And then we had Terence writing big, and then in brackets, big Dan Burn, big Joe Score, big moment for the club. Yeah, sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I like that. I like that Destiny one. I think that's that's very, very apt. It did feel like one of those nights where it was just written in the stars for Newcastle. So yeah, I think that's my favourite one, other than Blythe, obviously.
Other than Black, we've got Geordie Toon Life here saying it was tremendous, and I would 100% agree with that. Well, this has been the Everything is Black and White podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please remember to like and follow the podcast through your podcast provider. Leave us a rating and review if you get the chance as well, and pass the pod amongst your Newcastle United supporting friends and family. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're watching on Facebook or Twitter, give us a retweet or share. We do appreciate it. Me and Aaron will be back next week. Enjoy the rest of your week, and hopefully Newcastle get a favourable draw in the semi-final of the League Cup.